Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. And Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed, thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. And now thy two sons Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. So Jacob has come to the end of his life. Over the next couple chapters, we're going to see his last words. Jacob is getting ready to die. And word of that comes to Joseph. Joseph is a prince in Egypt. Joseph has big doings all the time, right? Joseph's in charge, but they call for him. Dad's getting ready to die. And Joseph comes and he brings his grandsons, he brings his sons, it would be Jacob's grandsons. They're called Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, when they come and see their grandfather, there is a great blessing that is mentioned there. Jacob brings his grandsons into his blessings. Read that again in verse number 5. Now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. He tells Joseph, your sons are my sons. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. So it's not just, this isn't just a nice picture. It's not just a nice thought. These aren't just words. This is something that is, he's very, very much serious about. There's a very literal sense in this, and we see that because guess what happens? Ephraim and Manasseh actually become tribes of Israel, right? When you talk about the 12 tribes, two of them that are mentioned are Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh were not sons of Jacob. They were grandsons of Jacob, but they become two tribes. And they will now be listed among the different lists when tribes are named. Now that does kind of explain to us why sometimes if you read in the Bible and it talks about the 12 tribes of Israel, sometimes those lists are different. And that is because Joseph, the tribe of Joseph, is actually two tribes. So the Bible can mention in Numbers chapter 13 the 12 tribes of Israel, but it leaves out Levi. And Revelation chapter 7 can mention the 12 tribes of Israel, and it leaves out Dan. And other places, the original listing of the 12 tribes of Israel lists Joseph, and it doesn't mention Ephraim and Manasseh. So if you ever look through the Bible and you see the 12 tribes that are mentioned, sometimes you'll see, it's not always the same 12 names that are mentioned there. And that kind of explains it because Joseph himself became two different tribes. Now, keep your finger there real quick in Genesis 48 and turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 5. Won't be here long, but 1 Chronicles chapter 5. 1 Chronicles. It says in verse number 1, 1 Chronicles 5, verse 1, Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was firstborn, but for as much as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the sons of Israel. And the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. Okay? Now, we'll flip back real quick to Genesis 48. But that even confirms for us that Reuben was Jacob's firstborn, right? If there's anybody that you would thought, okay, he's going to be the birthright. He's going to receive the double portion. That's kind of what we talk about when we talk about an Old Testament birthright, a double portion. You'd think, well, Reuben, he's the firstborn. No, Reuben doesn't get the birthright. He does not get the double portion. Who gets the double portion? Joseph does. Joseph actually becomes two tribes and ends up with two portions of inheritance. Genesis 48 is actually going to tell us that in the very last verse. Genesis 48 verse 22, it says, Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. So there even Jacob out of his own mouth confirms that, of all the brethren, you get the extra portion. And that is realized in his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. What a great adoption as Jacob brings his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, into this blessing and gives them an inheritance. Now let's go back up to verse 6, because he's going to mention something here for clarity's sake. Genesis 48, verse 6, and thy issue, which thou begettest after them, shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. So this was a blessing that was just reserved for Ephraim and Manasseh. If Joseph's not an old man, so if Joseph has more children after this, they're not included in what Jacob's doing. Remember, he said, Ephraim and Manasseh, they are mine. Now, if you have more kids, that's on you. Those are your kids, and their inheritance is actually going to be named after their brethren. So if Joseph has any more kids, they're going to be considered in the future among the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. So he kind of gives that for clarity's sake. But Ephraim and Manasseh, his two grandsons, are brought in by adoption and given this great blessing. Now, number 2, let's talk about that. A splendid blessing. A splendid blessing. Genesis 48, verse number 8. And Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, who are these? And Joseph said unto his father, they are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. And the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. If we're honest, we can say something similar like Joseph did there, right? Or that Jacob did. God's blessings very much so, very often, far exceed our expectations, don't they? That's how God works often with his children. Jacob, there was a time when he thought he'd never see Joseph again, right? He thought Joseph was dead. He didn't know his sons had sold him into slavery. He thought, Joseph's dead, I'll never see him again. And then reality hits, and he comes to the realization that I not only got to see Joseph, I got to see my grandsons by Joseph. And he considered that to be a great blessing of the Lord. He was so grateful, he was so thankful for that. And he says that God has showed me thy seed. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Joseph, and that's neat too, right? Joseph is a prince in Egypt. He still respects his dad. He still honors his father for who he is. That's a good thought. Verse 13, and Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand, toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand, toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. So when he brings his sons up to be blessed by Grandpa and to be brought in with this symbolic adoption, he brings his sons in. Manasseh's the oldest, so he's got Manasseh at his left hand so he can bring him to Jacob's right hand, because the right hand is like the symbol of strength. It's the symbol of blessing, the symbol of power. So he was going to bring Manasseh to Jacob's right hand, and then he was going to bring Ephraim with his right hand to Jacob's left. So you kind of see him presenting him. He's bringing him here intentionally, bringing the oldest one to Jacob's right hand and the youngest one to Jacob's left hand. Now, verse number 14, it says, and Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. Now, what does that mean, right? Because what did I just tell you? You're Jacob here, and I brought Ephraim to your left hand. So if you put your right hand on his head, what do you have to do? To go like that, right? And if you put your left hand on Manasseh's head, you have to go like that, because that's not how he brought them to him. Joseph brought them this way. Jacob blessed them this way. He crossed his hands. Now, what does that mean? It means that he put his right hand on the youngest one's head. He put his left hand on the oldest one's head. He flipped it. Compared to what Joseph expected, compared to what Joseph intended, Jacob switches. He crosses his hands when he blesses them. That's what it's saying in verse 14. Israel stretched out his right hand, laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. I like that. It says that he did it wittingly. This wasn't a mistake, right? And there was nothing that was done deceitfully, nothing that was done by means of trickery. He intentionally crossed his hands and blessed them. If you don't remember, Jacob's been through the episode before about what it means to bless the younger one instead of the older one. Now, you remember how Jacob obtained that. He had to do it by deceit. He had to do it by trickery when he and mom tricked Isaac into getting the blessing. That's not happening. That's not what is happening here. And Joseph was not trying to be deceptive when he brought his sons to him in a particular order. That was how Joseph assumed that it would work out. My oldest one to dad's right hand, my youngest one to his left. That's how he'll bless them. There's no harm there. There's no intent to deceive or anything like that. But he knowingly, wittingly, crossed his arms to bless them. And notice this blessing, verse 15. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, whom before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. That is the great blessing, right? Where he formally, he told Joseph he was going to do it, but now he formally brings these two grandsons into the promises that were made to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons, but now for all intents and purposes, you might as well consider it that Joseph is now 2, because Ephraim and Manasseh are brought in to the promises God made to Abraham and to Isaac as well. That is a great blessing that Joseph got to see and that Jacob got to perform. Now, verse 17 says, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. Whoa, Dad, hold on a second here. You got things crossed up. You got things mixed up. Your right hand is on Ephraim's head, and it should be on Manasseh's head. Let's switch these back up. And it says in verse 19 that his father refused and said, I know it, my son. I know it. He also shall become a people, but he also shall be great. But truly, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. He lets Joseph know, no, this was intentional. And this is part of the blessing, that the younger would surpass, that the younger would be greater than Manasseh. And it rings true throughout the Old Testament. In fact, when they leave Egypt, the younger son, Ephraim, that family is already larger. The family of Ephraim is larger than the family of Manasseh. You can read that in the book of Numbers chapter 1. I think it's verse 32 down through the rest of the chapter, where it's starting to number all of the tribes, and it's starting to count how many soldiers there were, how many men above the age of 20, fighting men of war. And Ephraim's already outgrown him. And Ephraim becomes a famous name for use throughout the land of Israel. What a blessing. Verse number 20, and he blessed them that day, saying, in thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. What a blessing, right? What a great thing that these boys, these grandsons, could be brought in as sons, that these grandsons could be made part of the covenant, these grandsons could be brought into the promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Number 3, a show of faith. This is the act that the writer of Hebrews keys in on when it wants to talk about Jacob being a man of faith. It doesn't talk about him wrestling the angel of the Lord. It doesn't talk about him being the father of the 12 tribes. It doesn't mention the episode where Jacob's name is changed from Jacob to Israel. It doesn't talk about the place where he became, when he changed from being a supplanter to a prince with God. This is the event that the writer of Hebrews keys in on. Now, why? What's so special about this event? Well, just give you a couple of things to consider. That's all we want to do tonight. Just give you a couple of things here to consider. First of all, consider his faith. Look again in verse number 5. Consider the faith of what he's saying in verse 5 and 6. And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, they are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. And thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. And then again in verse 22, when he talks about one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite. Jacob's getting ready to die. This is faith. He's already portioning out and allotting out land. He's already dividing up a land that he's never inherited. And that he's not going to inherit. He's going to die. He realizes that he's on his deathbed. Son, I die. And here in the next chapters, chapter 49, he's going to bring in the rest of his sons, and he's going to give each of them their blessing. He's getting ready to die. You know what he's doing? He's already talking about the inheritance. Now, when you get into the land, these two, they each get a portion. Joseph, you're going to get a double portion. You're going to get one portion above thy brethren. Now, if you have any more children, I'm not giving them additional land. They're actually going to be in the inheritance. He's just talking about it like it's going to happen. Like there's no doubt that it's going to happen. There's no doubt that God's going to give you this land, that someday you're going to leave this place and you're going to be portioning out the land. And when you get there, here's how it's going to be divided. You just listen, he just talks about it like it's a natural thing. You and I know that like bad times are getting ready to happen. There's soon going to be a nation in Egypt that forgets about Joseph, that forgets about all the blessings that they had under Joseph. Israel's going to go into bondage. Israel's going to be in slavery. It's going to be a long time. Jacob, he doesn't know all the details. He just lives, assuming that what God said he was going to do, he's going to do. And, okay, when you get to the land, here's who gets what. No doubt about it. He just doesn't have any doubt. He's laying down to die and just assumes that everything God promised him is going to come to pass, and he can talk to his sons about portioning off the land. That's faith. When you can start dividing up the land that you yourself are never going to see, but trust that your sons will inherit it. So consider his faith there. Let me say this secondly. Consider how he recalls where God's promises to him began. In verse number 3 of chapter 48 here, it says, as Jacob begins to talk, Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He's going all the way back to Genesis chapter 28, where he encounters the Lord, where these promises were really reiterated to him, promises that were made to Abraham and to Isaac, but that are really confirmed to him for the first time in chapter 28. Notice that. Genesis 28, in verse number 10, it says, Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, behold, a ladder set upon the earth, and upon the top of it, reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. And in thee and thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Think about that. Those are the same words, the same promises God made to Abraham and then made to Isaac. Now they get confirmed to Jacob. And we know this story, the story of Jacob's ladder, the dream that he has there, the vision that he sees of this ladder that ascends and the angels of God ascending and descending. And it was there. And it was there in that dream and in that vision and that night that God's promises were confirmed to him. The covenant God made with Abraham and Isaac now applies to Jacob as well. He lived with that in his mind. This was not a passing thing. This was not a passing fancy. This promise altered him, changed him. The promises that God made him when he has come to his deathbed and he goes to talk to his sons, where does he start? Let me tell you about what God promised me. And he's not going all the way back. He's not going back to events necessarily of his childhood. He's certainly not going quite all the way yet into the details of the fight with Esau, his deception, and how all of that played out. Sons, let me tell you about when God appeared to me and made me these promises. When you talk about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and when it talks about how they lived by faith and they lived by the promises of God, it doesn't mean that it's just something they kept in the back of their mind and it's something that they thought about during the hard times to get them through. These are promises that shaped and molded their destiny, the way that they viewed life, the way that they lived their lives after these events. This event so altered Jacob. In chapter number 28, you come down to the end, look at verse number 19, that he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee. Bethel, right? That phrase that means the house of God. You see its origination here. This place, it wasn't what it was always called. This place was called Luz. But Jacob made a vow unto God that this place shall be God's house. And it became known as Bethel. That's a name you're used to hearing in the Old Testament, right? This is the place that God first appeared unto Jacob and committed these promises to him. And you get to the end of Jacob's life, and he wants to take you back to where it started. These are the promises that he was living by. This is what shaped him. This is what molded him. Consider also the value that he placed on God's promises. Consider his faith. Consider how he recalls where the promises began. But now consider the value that he placed on these promises. Do you know who Joseph was? Joseph was a prince in Egypt. Joseph had saved Egypt. Joseph had saved the surrounding countries by all that he had done to prepare Egypt and to prepare food during the time of plenty so that everyone could survive the time of famine. Joseph had been elevated in Egypt to second in command. His word carried weight. He was everything except Pharaoh. And he comes before his father, and his father does not put any value in that. You know what Jacob put value in? Son, I'm going to give you 2 portions of land. I'm going to give you 2 portions of inheritance in the land that God promised to our fathers and to us. Joseph is a prince in Egypt, but his real blessing is a double portion in Canaan land. Now, does that matter to Joseph? Well, I think it does. Because do you remember when the book of Hebrews talks about the faith of Joseph? Do you remember what it mentions? When Hebrews talks about the faith of Joseph, it does not talk about his endurance in trial. The book of Hebrews does not talk about Joseph's perseverance when he was persecuted or when he was lied about, and his rising up after falling and his recovery from being sold. And it doesn't mention any of those things. When the book of Hebrews mentions the faith of Joseph, what does it mention? That he made his brothers promise that when they left that land, they would not leave his bones there. That they would take him and bury him in the land of their fathers. Joseph was sold into slavery as a young man. Very little of his life did he ever know anything about Canaan land. But Joseph made his brothers promise him, when you leave you take me too. Here is a man that was a prince in Egypt that would basically sing the song, "This world is not my home." Egypt was never his home. And so it looks like the value that Jacob instilled in him did indeed mean something. That meant more than being a prince in Egypt, than being buried in Egypt and having a glorious tomb and a tombstone that marked all of his accomplishments. Joseph would say, "No, don't leave me here. When God delivers you and you leave, take me with you. I'll be dead, but take my bones." And he made his brethren swear to it. And that mattered. That mattered to Jacob, and it mattered to Joseph. Consider his declaration. Verse 15. "And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil." Listen how he declares and how he recalls that it's God that has done all of the. God has fed him, God has provided for him, God has protected him all this way, no matter what has happened. And Jacob's life has been a series of trials often. And Jacob has made his own mistakes. And yet he witnesses and testifies that God has provided for him. God made me promises, and God kept his end of the bargain. And God has provided for me, and he's fed me, and he's protected me, and he's saved me out of trouble time and time again. It actually kind of starts to become no wonder that the writer of Hebrews would recall Genesis chapter 48. There's so much in this chapter about how, it's just his faith on display, his testifying of who God is and what God has done for him, his challenge to his son, his promises to his son and his grandson about, us having that land's just as real as let's just sit up here today and let's plot the map out. Let's divide up the land now. It was so real to him. God's promises were something that he lived by. And when Hebrews chapter 11 says, "These all died in faith, having not received the promises, but having seen them afar off," that's Abraham, that's Isaac, that's Jacob. Men that maybe they didn't get to see them themselves, but they saw him. You can't read Genesis chapter 48 and tell me that Jacob didn't see what God was going to do, that he didn't have faith, that he didn't believe and trust that his boys, that his grandsons, that his descendants someday would occupy that land. So when Hebrews wants to recount his faith, it brings you back to the episode where he sat with his grandsons and he blessed them. Grandsons that he thought that he would never see, but he actually blessed and brought in to the inheritance and the promises of God. Grace does not always follow expectations. Jacob learned that. Jacob at one time was a supplanter, and he cheated his dad and lied and deceived his dad into a blessing, right? He didn't have to do that with his grandsons. Right there in front of him, he could bless the younger above the greater, and it was all on the up and up. It was all there for everybody to see. And it became a visual testimony to another generation that, you know what? Grace isn't always what you expect. But God's promises are faithful, they endure, they are sure. So when you read about faith, and you read about the heroes of faith, and you think about, the great things that Joseph had done and the great things that Jacob had done, man, what would it have been like to wrestle with the angel of the Lord? That's not what he mentions. That would have been cool. That would have been neat. And it would have been fitting. There would have probably been some things that we could talk about with that. But it was this event that he got to his grandsons that he never thought that he would see. And he talks about God's promises, God providing for him. And boys, we'll bring you into that. And you're going to be my sons. And he takes the promises of God and he gives them to those grandsons just as true and just as sure as the promises that God made him all those years prior. It's just another piece of evidence, right? It's just another testimony from another family, another person in Scripture that all of the things that God has said, you might as well take it to the bank, right? It's as sure can be. And the winding road that gets you there is often filled with things that you may not expect. Jacob never expected to see the sons of Joseph. But when he saw them, guess what? He could bless them with the promises of God. That's some of the first things, right? Some of the first things that when he sees his grandsons, you would think, man, there's so much catching up to do, right? Let's talk about the Lord. Let's talk about what God has done for me in bringing me to this place and what he's going to do for you. Jacob seems to grasp at the end. He understands what is important. And I hope we learn that too. May God give us courage and grace to learn those same lessons. All right, Father, we're thankful to come tonight.